Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, as part of our special coverage of Austin Film Festival's 26th year, I was lucky enough to chat with writer Dayo Adesokan. We talk about his work on Superstore, his career path, and how he got into the writer's room, what he finds fun about writing comedy, and which characters are his favorites to write for. It's a great chat, and I think you'll enjoy. So this is Les for the TV Dudes, here with Dayo Adesokan. I have had a really great track record this weekend with names, so this is great. I'm so glad to get to talk to you. I love Superstore.
Sweet, man.
Downward Dog is obviously a show that's going to be legendary for a lot of people, I think.
I hope so.
And I really wanted to talk about how you got your career going, the writer's mentoring program, and the kind of the path you took to be in the room.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like for a lot of people, there's a lot of different paths available out there, and essentially there's like 4 or 5 different things that any aspiring writer could be doing to make it, and I think you should. Most of those things aren't mutually exclusive, so you should be doing all of them.
Try to do them all.
Yeah. So in my case, I was a finalist at AFF back in 2012. And I think that helped me get into the CBS Writers Mentoring Program. Coming out of that, I didn't get staffed, but through the connections I made there, I was able to become an assistant, and that helped me sort of pad my resume and get into the Disney ABC Writing Program, which is where coming out of that program, I eventually got staff, I got representation, and the rest is history.
Can you talk a little bit about how your writing changed from being in the room?
Yeah, I would say that, and it's, I would say essentially like being in a writer's room, and I would say even maybe not for a show that you consider to be spectacular, though I am very grateful for the experiences that I've had, and I feel like Superstore is by far the best job I've ever had, and I'm very happy to be there. But that said, that experience inherently makes you a better writer because you are constantly receiving notes from the network, notes from your showrunners. Basically, at every step along the way, you are having to throw things out or revise things. And I think that as an aspiring writer, there's a little bit of a rush there to essentially want to finish your pilot, get it out there, and sort of have somebody in the world give you a job based on this thing that you've completed. And so we probably don't take as much time revising things and really polishing them as we might otherwise. And I think that's a skill that you pick up in the writer's room, along with just learning how production works and why you don't want to have a scene where 2 people are just talking to each other for 3 pages because that's inherently boring. You pick up a lot of little skills like that, and I think you sort of develop your tone too. Another thing that I think a lot of aspiring comedy writers do is you write a bunch of jokes and you're happy with your jokes and you're proud of them and you don't want to change them, but they might not be tonally consistent with the script that you're writing, and so people get a little precious or maybe get a little married to the jokes that they have and to the scenes that they have. But once you're in a room where the tone is determined entirely by a showrunner, by another party, and you're trying to satisfy their tone, then you realize that basically what you have to live up to, and that tone has to be consistent. You can't just sort of be all over the place because you thought of something funny.
I was talking to Nora Nolan yesterday, who wrote on Trial and Error, and she talked about one of her favorite things about being on that show was that you could black out all the names on the script, and you knew whose jokes were whose. I mean, what character would have to say which joke. You couldn't just mix them or randomize. That joke had to come out of Dwayne's mouth, and that joke had to come out of so-and-so's mouth.
Yeah.
Can you remember on Superstore, what was the first character that you felt like you really got their joke, or okay, I can write a Mateo joke?
Yeah. I would say, and that is the ideal, I think, for writers at any level, is to write a script such that, the dialogue is so specific to the characters that you can cover up their names and be able to tell who wrote what. I think that some of the funnest characters to write for me anyway, are probably Dina, Marcus, and Glenn. They are, I think all our characters are fairly specific, but they're sort of they have their own realities in a way that's fun to write for. I think that's something to consider when you're writing characters, is just what is funny about the personality of this character. And if you're writing a comedy script, each character should have something that's inherently funny about them and a place that you go to mine jokes. And so with those people, it's just that they're so out there that it's easier to mine jokes from their personalities.
About a month ago, I had the opportunity to go to a screenwriter friend of mine's read-through that she just put together at her house.
Yeah.
And it's something that we'd all been told to do, like, oh, you should definitely get people to read this aloud and hear it. And it's just something that so few people I know think, oh, I should put a call out on Facebook and get a bunch of friends over on a Sunday and have a read-through.
Yeah.
It really helped her make some changes to her script.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, as a writer, your transition from that bubble, solipsistic, I wrote this alone, transition to a place where you are going to get notes and you are going to get criticism, and not from a bad place, but from an improved place. Can you talk a bit about shifting your own relationship to your work so that you could accept criticism?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I would say that your ability to make it in this industry is contingent on a number of factors, right? One is luck. Another is privilege, whatever form that takes. And I would say that the three that you have the most control over are, one, how hard you're willing to work, like how hard, essentially how much time you make for writing on a daily basis. Two, your ability to take criticism and to just sort of be willing to put your work out there into the world and see what people have to say about it. And I think that it's natural that, or at least my experience of receiving criticism is that I get notes back, and the first time I read them, I'm like, this person has no idea what they're talking about. They don't know what I'm going for. These are terrible notes. And then I always come back to it 24, 48 hours later, and I'm like, okay, this actually makes sense. Like, these are good changes that I can make to clarify, etc. But you will not grow as a writer if you don't take that criticism. And it's ultimately up to you to determine what will help your script versus what is not in line with what you're going for, and then that's a skill that you develop over time. But I would say that the very last skill as a writer, the very last factor that will determine your success in this industry is the extent to which you're willing to rewrite, because that's the majority of your writing is rewriting, as they say.
I was going to ask if you ever found yourself looking at a note and thinking, you know what, fine, I will write the version that matches this note, even though I know it's wrong.
Yeah.
and then,
I think that tends to happen in development a bit, because you have these, you have these producers that have their, and I don't want to give producers a bad rap, because I think that what they do is very valuable. I think that as writers we have a very specific idea, ideally a very specific idea of what we're trying to write, and it's producers' job to make that thing understandable to anybody that's not you. And so a lot of their notes tend to come from that place. But I will say I found myself in situations where the producers give notes on things that maybe I've ignored it once or twice, but they bring it up a third time, and it's like, all right, I got to find a way to do this in a way that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And there is I think that that's not necessarily a thing that hinders creativity. I think the restrictions can oftentimes allow for more creativity. So by having to take this note and make this change that you don't want to change, it might force you to make other changes in the script that allow that thing to make sense. And that might make for a more robust and complex script in a good way.
Yeah, I definitely felt that way. And I went to art school for painting, and we used to laugh that if you got told, just make an art, some kind of art, anything.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. What do I make? What do you want?
Yeah.
But if they told you, hey, I need a 12 by 12 canvas painting, do it in oil, even just that little bit of restriction would give you a boundary to bounce off of, and you'd be doing great.
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes is Robert Frost says, "Free verse poetry is like playing tennis with the net down."
That's great.
I think just it speaks to how adding structure to things can often make them better.
Yeah, I think that's something that, at this fest particularly, that we all love about movies and TV is this game of, I know there's a false structure.
Yes.
Movies are not, there's no climax in real life. There's no act structure. And then the degree to which you hide that structure from me is the game.
Yeah.
And I kind of love that about movies, of realizing wow, this felt true, like a life story, but I know it was put together in a contrived way.
Yeah.
It had to have been.
No, that's my my best movie experiences are where I'm sitting there looking at the screen and I'm not thinking about what act I'm in. I'm not thinking about structurally what's about to happen. I'm just like lost in it.
Yeah.
And I think that before we start writing before I started writing anyway, that was how I saw movies. I didn't know the mechanics behind them, and that made them more enjoyable. But the more you write, the more those mechanics become intuitive to you, and so you have a harder time appreciating this thing that you used to really love. But when it's done well, you get lost in it.
Yeah, because you can be 6 minutes into a sitcom now and know what's going to happen. Like, there's certain structure to it. And my favorite moments are when I forget that. Consequently, my least favorite moments in movies are frequently when I realize we have 30 minutes left and my brain runs down the 5 plot points we still have. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to do the math on this. Stop. One last question. As far as, like you said, taking those notes and taking criticism, what's been the hardest darling for you to kill on a project? Have you ever had a note where it's just really difficult to let it go?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I have an answer to that. So I was working on a script not that long ago, and I think I can share the idea. So essentially it's a comedy about a world where comedy doesn't exist, where comedy has been outlawed. It's a dystopian future thing. And so my idea for that, and it's based on a piece of pre-existing IP that when I read it I thought it was a cool idea, but I didn't necessarily see a script coming out of that, and so I decided to write a version of that using that nugget, a version of it that I would want to watch. And I think that that's an important thing as writers. Like, you should be honest with yourself about whether or not you would actually want to watch this thing that you've written, because we know how much TV there is out there right now. Odds are, it's hard for things to attract people's attention. But anyway, essentially I wanted to add, or I initially had an element in there that was racial, because that speaks to my experience of the world. Essentially a version of the world where this dystopian totalitarian regime has banned comedy, and minorities are more heavily persecuted on the grounds that we laugh more. Which
I was just sitting here thinking, I think I know where this is probably going.
Which is a completely absurd concept, but one that I really vibed with, and I'm really proud of the script as it came out. But over and over again, I would get the note that I needed to tone down sort of like the racial aspect of it. But for me, that was the whole reason I was writing it, so that was a very tough thing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I ended up toning it down such that it was more subtle, less sort of like on the nose, which I think may have ended up actually strengthening the script. Did you have to find something else to interest yourself in it? I mean, did you have to kind of strengthen something else to keep that interest level at where it was for yourself? Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a question of finding a way to make what was sort of like blatantly racially motivated, and finding a way to make that more of like at the microaggression level, which is in and of itself a more, I think, potentially more interesting way to do that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me about all of this. This is awesome, man. I appreciate your time. Yeah.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener-supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/TVDudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @TV Dudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.